Happy Saturday. Welcome to the BYP Live. I'm doing this live today because I've been gathering information, collecting, looking into things and re-looking into things. First off, I want to say welcome on a Saturday. I usually do my lives on Sunday evening, and I will be doing tomorrow's live tomorrow night, 6 o'clock Mountain Time in the United States. But I wanted to do this live today instead of a pre-recorded. This format has some benefits that the recording format doesn't have, and vice versa. Hey, Thomas Law, good to see you. Yeah, I'm looking forward to having you here in the comments. I've taken my notes. There is a lot of information here. I want to do a deep dive on a historical, broader context and on the bombshell that Lue Elizondo is allegedly being a disinformation agent like Richard Doty was. And that is a bombshell. Truly. There are reasons why people are trying to come to that conclusion. And I want to investigate that because, again, what I want to know is what's actual, what's real, right? This means that we study information that we agree with. This means we study information that we disagree with. This means we study information that we are ignorant of that has to do with whatever subject we're looking into. And this is a lot of work. I'm not going to hide that from you. That's why a lot of people don't do it. We've been brainwashed by the state to not think deeply. We've been brainwashed to believe that if you can't get the information in a 3-minute soundbite, then it's not worth your time, and you are shortcutting your life, your intellect, and potentially your safety. Knowledge is not cheaply acquired. That's just not how it works. So anyway, I'm grateful for everyone who's showing up. This is going to be a deep dive. I'm going to have to read it. I've got my notes in my Word, and I'm going to have to read it because they're just so dadgum much, because I want to give you the context that matters. I've got lots of new information and connections that, so far as I'm aware of, and I have watched many, many YouTube videos on this in the previous few weeks, no one is talking about this. And yet they're coming to some really breathtaking conclusions about Lue Elizondo and about other people and about the context of the UFOs, that they may be stretching the evidence. And so I want to give my point of view. Besides, it's fun. It's interesting. It's always good to research something over again that someone's already come to a conclusion to, because just because that person comes to that conclusion doesn't mean that's the reality. Now, my conclusions, whatever conclusions I come to, may not be the base and full reality. That's how this works. I'm not the last word on this either, but I do have some new connections and some new ideas that no one else has ever brought out, including some of the interviews with Lue Elizondo himself. I've examined how he talks, what he is saying, and what he himself defines as to what he means. And there's some clues in there that no one's finding. And if they are, they're not talking about it. Today, I'm going to talk about it on my show. So you're in for a treat. You're bound to get some new views, new information. Some of this is going to be historical. It's going to be analytical. It's going to be philosophical. It's definitely going to be UFO. And it's also going to be government secrecy as well. So, hey, the good Inquisitor, good to see you. So where's the news? Yeah, it's coming. It's coming. I got to introduce it, right? All right. So here we go. Let's take a look at this. Now, I also need you to understand something. I am not doing pro Lue Elizondo. I am not doing anti Lue Elizondo. I'm not interested in his personality. I'm going to explore what is going on with him, right? I'm not going to come to any hard, fast conclusions on whether I like him or hate him or anything like that. I want to examine the actual evidence. I have found some declassified government documents that have added an entire new dimension to everything about the UFOs and government involvement that I want to share with you today. So it takes some investigatory footwork, which I've been doing for the last several weeks, and I've got some interesting stuff for you. Yeah, and I understand that. Someone in the chat says, yeah, after watching him for years, I'm suspicious. Absolutely. I will explain that in this video as well. Absolutely. This live session too. Yeah, Lue is not above suspicion. That's true. I am 100% with you on that. What's causing that? That's what I want to investigate. What's causing us to now be trying to figure out who's on our side in the UFO community and who's not? What's going on? Are we being artificially divided in order to make our movement less powerful, less effective, less meaningful? Because now the ufology is getting out into the general public. Do they want us as one solid block of well-researched people who understand our materials, or do they want us squabbling, trying to figure out who's who and who says what? See, all of the little infighting groups only weakened the whole process. And is that the government secrecy winning? And again, I know, I get it. You're just in conspiracy mode. The fact is, in this subject, you've got no choice. Conspiracy mode is one of the modes we all have to entertain. That's just how this works. Not my fault. It's the way it works. So that's what it is. Okay. All right, Ryan Kidd, I'm glad to accommodate you. I'll give you some good info while you're driving. Very good. So what is Elizondo? I've got my notes here. I'm going to read below the screen here. What is Elizondo actually known for? He became publicly known in 2017 after, of course, he got out of ATIP, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. It was in the New York Times. He ran the program, he claims, inside the Pentagon. He was investigating UAP encounters involving U.S. military. That was his role. He helped the Nimitz Tic Tac encounter with the video and the gimbal and the go fast. He joined with Tom DeLonge to the STARS Academy of Arts and Sciences. So Lue's confirmed role is in UAP investigation and not crash retrieval. This is going to be important later on. There is a new information, I believe UAP Gerb on Area 52, Chris Ramsey. I believe he's discussing some interesting ideas that Lue may have been in the legacy program. And if he was, he needs to speak up, right? He needs to admit that, etc. So there's always going to be some intrigue. We don't know the full extent of Lue's background other than what he has told us. And so this kind of builds up a chance to get some different angles on him. And there's nothing wrong with that, but we have to be measured and stick with the evidence would be my advice. So the speculation on him being in the legacy program is his security background, of course, because before ATIP, he worked in counterintelligence and special access programs in the Pentagon. He tells that. That means SAPs, highly compartmentalized intelligence projects. So he could have been read into deeper programs, that is entirely plausible and possible. I'm not arguing he did or didn't. I'm just saying, yeah, that's a legit concern. Now, the language that Lue uses in his interviews is remarkably interesting if you pay attention to the clues. He repeatedly hinted at things like there are some very, very sensitive programs related to UAP. Okay. He carefully avoids confirming crash retrieval, however. He tends to say things like, I cannot discuss certain legacy efforts, and so he's going to keep us in the dark on that because of his security clearances. Now, this is what makes everyone begin to speculate. I get it. It's all right. I'm not condemning anyone for investigating and speculating. That's what I'm doing here today. And there is overlap with whistleblower testimony with Elizondo. David Grush claimed that multiple intelligence officers knew about the legacy program. Is Lue one of those? We don't know yet, but that's the current speculation out there. Some of them were former UAP investigators. Well, that was Lue's program in ATIP. So they're trying to make connections, all legit. Because Elizondo fits that, people connect the dots. But Grush never has publicly named Lue Elizondo in that role. That's important to know. So the Pentagon dispute, there's an additional wrinkle here. The U.S. Department of Defense has said that Lue did not run ATIP. You go, what? So Elizondo disputes that, and he says documentation exists. We haven't seen any. Journalists Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal, of course, have supported Elizondo's version. So it's a still unresolved bureaucratic dispute. That's what we get to work with, is contradictions, questions, differences of opinions, different amounts and different qualities of various evidences. That's just welcome to ufology. That's what it's all about right there. So the real possibilities is I can find 3 scenarios here. And these scenarios are interesting. He was only in ATIP. That's one scenario. He studied UAP encounters. He never saw crash retrieval programs. Scenario number 2 is he knew about deeper programs, but he was not inside of them. Now, this, of course, logistically is going to be quite real. I think. I don't think that can be disputed. So, in other words, I'm claiming he has indirect awareness through intelligence channels. Scenario 3 is he had some level of access. We don't know if he was read into the full legacy program, if he was read into only a part of the legacy program. We just don't know because it's under secret, right? So right now, there's no evidence proving scenario 3. So why is Lue so careful? Well, there's an obvious number of very valid reasons why he's going to be very careful. If a crash retrieval program existed, the unacknowledged special access programs, the USAPs, if you discuss it, you open up classified program laws, non-disclosure agreements, national security statutes. So that's going to be all limited. We get that. So here's the bottom line. The speculation out there on YouTube and on all, TikTok and Facebook and wherever, a lot of the speculation is Elizondo may have been connected to the alleged legacy program. He's never confirmed this. No whistleblower has ever publicly named him as being in the legacy program, and evidence is currently circumstantial speculation. That is what we know at this point. There's major internal disagreement, however, between Elizondo's supporters and David Grush's supporters about who actually controls the alleged crash retrieval programs. And this is interesting too. The Air Force, are they the ones that's in charge of this? Or is it the private contractors? Are they the ones in charge of crash retrievals? That dispute reveals a possible structure of the legacy program hierarchy. The disagreement is going to boil down into who actually controls the crash retrieval and the reverse engineering effort. That's where we're at. We don't know, but there are a couple of possibilities, and there's different people arguing one way and arguing the other way. Two competent models have emerged. Model one, the Air Force control model, and this is the traditional UFO research view. Basically, the program's fundamentally military controlled through the United States Air Force. So that's how that works. Why supporters believe this? Because historically, many UFO cases involving Air Force investigation programs. The Project Sign in 1948 is one I found. Project Grudge in 1949. Project Blue Book in 1952 to 69, which was the longest running project. So the Air Force runs the program. Contractors, you have Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, Raytheon Technologies. They simply build and analyze the UFO technology in this model. So the government still controls everything. The second model is the contractor control model. This is closer to what the supporters of David Grush think is happening in the world of ufology. In this theory, government lost direct control decades ago. It is the private corporations who not only have the goods, but Congress and most of the Pentagon do not have access to those, and only a small classified group knows the whole picture. So, according to several whistleblower claims that I've been able to find, after early crash retrievals linked to the Roswell incident, sometimes the U.S. government moved materials to contractors for secrecy and legal shielding. Now, why would they do that? We have what is called corporate shields. Private companies can classify proprietary technology against anyone they want. They can include who they want, and they can and do exclude anyone they don't want, including presidents of a country or Congress or the Senate or the House. They can exclude it because they're a private corporation. They can block the Freedom of Information Act requests as well to their company. If you do a FOIA to the private contractor, they can block that. The government can't. Whatever materials the government has that has been properly declassified, and that is some of the documents I've discovered and I will share with you today, but they operate outside of normal congressional oversight, these private corporations. So once they have it, you can't access it. So where does Lue Elizondo fit in this debate between government access through Air Force or private corporation interests? Supporters of Lue Elizondo tend to lean toward the Air Force model. They argue the military never fully gave up control, and contractors work under the direction of government. Okay. Meanwhile, supporters of David Grush say contractors effectively captured the program. Even the Pentagon can barely access it. Okay, so that's one of the biggest internal disputes in the disclosure movement right now. So there's this shadow government idea. They propose a hybrid structure. Some will propose this hybrid structure. The executive branch, the president, has very limited awareness of the ufology and the technology. There's a small classified oversight group. Air Force and intelligence program managers, perhaps. Private aerospace contractors have it. And then that, in turn, is compartmentalized into different areas of research on different parts, assuming that they have a crash retrieval, right? So that's why nobody sees the full picture. Now, this is something Bob Lazar mentioned at Area 51. this compartmentalization. Knowledge is split across multiple compartments. It's if the legacy program existed under the contractor model, then this is going to explain a few things that are very interesting. Congress has a hell of a time investigating UAP claims. We've seen that now in 4 different hearings, haven't we? I mean, for real. So the Pentagon officials, like the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, AARO, they say they cannot find the program. And whistleblowers claim information is hidden in unacknowledged special access programs. Now, the skeptics, we got to give them their voice because it's really important to see all sides of an issue. If you're only reading and studying the side that you like, you're going to end up with confirmation bias and never see the full rounded out picture of reality. The best way to counter that is to read both sides, regardless of how distasteful it might be to read the other side that you know obviously is wrong. If you want to be as close to a legitimate conclusion as you can get, you have no choice. You got to read all sides of this stuff. And yeah, this takes some time. You have to be able to love the topic to be able to look into this on all sides. Otherwise, go to something else you like, snowboarding or, racing a car around a track at the Indy 500 or whatever you love to do. Well, the critics, they say that such a system would be extremely difficult to maintain because thousands of engineers would eventually talk. But we saw Bob Lazar come out and talk, and he's got nothing but kicked in the teeth for it, right? So maybe not. Of course, and Bob Lazar is only one person. Now we've had several other who have, in the last few years, I think more and more is coming out. I think Jesse Michaels has talked to a few. I even talked to George Filer, and I had him on my show a couple of times with Robert Sheep of Custodian Files. So, very few people come out. Also, they argue that budget trails would appear in the course of this type of thing. We've never seen that really. Oversight committees would detect anomalies, and we haven't. If we've seen anomalies with the oversight committees who are barely functioning in our Congress, if they're functioning at all, we, the public, haven't heard about it. Maybe Congress knows more than we give them credit for. I don't know. So skeptics say the theory overestimates the secrecy capacity, and there is something to say about that. Secrets of the nuclear bomb slipped out pretty quick, The Russians took over the CIA pretty fast and easy during the Cold War era and got the secrets. Now, here's the really wild part, though. There were some insiders who said that the alleged program is not a single program, but that there is a patchwork of many different programs over the decades. And what they did is they gave them each different names, and there were different sponsors, and that kept it hidden, scattered it about in unknown locations. So in the 1947 to 1960s, say, you have the initial recovery programs. In the 1960s to the 1980s, you have the early reverse engineering. From the 1980s to the 2000s, you would have the black aerospace integration of these things. And then in the 2000s, all the way up to right now, we would have compartmentalized advanced research. That's kind of the timeline model of this thing. So that's why it's called the legacy program, right? That would be, because it supposedly evolved through the generations. So the bottom line, these two competing hypotheses about the alleged crash retrieval effort, the Air Force model controlled by the U.S. military, and the contractor model, and it's controlled by the aerospace corporations. And there appears in the UFO community that there really are two different groups, say the Elizondo group and the David Grush camp, who tend to favor different versions of this structure. But there might be a third theory here. Let's take a look at this, because some intelligence analysts discuss the legacy program may actually be inside the nuclear weapons command structure, not in the Air Force at all. And this gives us really interesting clues now that is worth looking into. If it is actually under the Nuclear Weapons Command Center, things start getting interesting quick. So this possibility changes the entire idea of why the UFOs might be interested in our nuclear capabilities. And I've got evidence today I'll show you, not just here in the United States, but around the world. And I've got that from declassified documents. Now, this gets interesting quick. So let's look at this nuclear command model. And this is really remarkable, because if the legacy program does sit within the nuclear area, as some are claiming, not the Air Force at all, then this is a hypothesis discussed by investigators. Got to understand, though, it's not that they've proven it. See, this is yeah. You get talking about proof and you go, wow, proof is a tough one in the UFO world. It really is. So it's an intriguing framework. That's how I'm going to propose this. I have a whole diatribe in the blurb here on the idea of proof. I'm not going to worry about that. You understand how hard it is to get proof. So the United States Strategic Command, what this group oversees is the nuclear weapons, the strategic deterrence, the global missile warning systems, and space surveillance. That's a pretty broad umbrella, right? It's a pretty big, program. Why researchers consider this possibility? Because of patterns in the historical reports that they have had access to. Multiple alleged UFO incidents occurred at nuclear weapons facilities. That's no longer classified information. I mean, I'll get to you've got Malmstrom Air Force Base UFO incident, for instance, Rendlesham Forest incident. You've got the Mino Air Force Base UFO sightings. The witnesses claims that object hovered over the missile fields. The missile systems temporarily were disabled. Military security teams responded to this, and they could not do anything about it. That's what freaked everyone out. Later on, several admitted, man, we thought it was them, and them over there who was experiencing the problem said, oh, we thought it was them. And we just about had World War III over this incident, right? We've heard the stories before. Richard Dolan has covered it. Jesse Michaels has covered it very good. Researchers like Robert Hastings have also covered it. He's the one that wrote the book on the nuclear and the UFO issues. Now, he went and got former missile officers, and he had them discuss this incident with him. And that's where he gets his information, from direct witnesses, from direct experiencers of these weird and wild experiences. So the same command network that handles nuclear weapons would oversee investigation of anomalous craft. In a way that makes sense based on the alleged incidents at nuclear facilities. One happened in Montana in the United States, and another one was off in Russia that we're aware of. And we have new evidence that that really did happen. So, and I will share that with you here in just a little bit. So this is the idea of national survival priority. Look, If there's things up there in the sky, the UFOs, and they're going to be able to know our toppest of secret passwords in order to work these deadly missiles, nuclear warheads, and they can either shut them down or turn them off, then Houston, we have a problem. So it makes sense that this proposed model, not being under the Air Force and not being under a private contractor, but being under the Nuclear Commission, because they are the one most associated with national survival. And we just about entered World War III because of the alleged UFO incidents by nuclear sites. So that's a strategic threat. So nuclear command authorities would want oversight. That makes eminent sense. And of course, this gives the highest security clearance infrastructure. Nuclear command systems operate with extreme secrecy, compartmentalization, and continuous monitoring networks. That infrastructure could easily host a highly classified program. There's no doubt about it. What about the idea of global networks of sensors? We have connections in every continent of the world through various electronic means and sensors. What about something like that? The nuclear monitoring systems track missile launches from any country to any other country. It gives radar anomalies. It knows when radar anomalies occur. And it also scans the skies to see if anything is moving around up there as well. That's a pretty overall all-encompassing coverage. They could detect unusual craft in that regard. So it would make sense to put the UFO under that type of system. It's super secret and it's super comprehensive. So why this is so interesting? They occur near missile silos, these experiences with UFOs. They occur near nuclear storage depots, and they occur at strategic bomber bases. They even know which of the bases to prioritize in order to visit. I don't know about you, but that information is top secret, classified. How would the UFOs be able to discriminate one of those bases apart from the other hundreds all over the world? That tells you there's a high intelligence going on here. And that is exactly where our government and other governments get their paranoia. That now makes much better sense. So the United States Air Force Global Strike Command and the North American Aerospace Defense Command, those are facilities that are associated with this. They believe this suggests the phenomenon may monitor nuclear capabilities. Now, there are others who say, yeah, well, you're making a big deal, you're making a big whoop-de-doo out of nothing because nuclear bases are already heavily surveyed, so unusual aerial objects get noticed more often, right? So what about the legacy program? We've now seen 3 different models, and each in its own right has a certain logic to it, right? So if the nuclear command model were the one that was valid, we would have a national command authority, a strategic nuclear command, and of course, they're going to be very compartmentalized. The Air Force is going to have operational units and the private aerospace contractors. So neither the Air Force model nor the contractor model would be completely correct. Instead, the program would sit inside the strategic deterrence command system. That's what the model shows. So And the skeptics, you got to give the skeptics their view on this, because nuclear-based sightings are anecdotal. And they also say that the radar anomalies could be misidentified objects. And I mean, there's a lot of stuff that they still misidentify, so that makes sense, right? There's no verified evidence that missiles were disabled by unknown craft, and the government investigation so far, the all-domain anomalous, the AARO, say they have found no confirmed extraterrestrial technology, which, of course, in ufology, we know who we realize those guys might have been lying through their teeth, or else they're playing fast and loose with various definitions of what words mean, right? Why is this hypothesis so appealing? And I'll bring this back into Lue Elizondo here in a moment. This is the background to understanding better what could be going on based on what Lue hints at when he's talking. And this is what everyone is missing. That's why I'm giving you this long, boring rundown and putting you to sleep, but it's necessary. For us, the UFO researchers, the ufology group, the nuclear command model ties together several different mysteries that we are aware of collectively. The repeated sightings near nuclear bases. It wasn't just a one-off event and, oh, done. 10 minutes it happened and never again. No, nothing could be further from the truth. Nothing. The extreme secrecy around nuclear command systems, which is necessary, and the reports of missile interference events, turning on the missiles or turning off, etc., stuff like that. Well, this provides a strategic defense explanation for why this issue may be treated as top secret. And you go, yeah, of course. So the legacy program might be in there, if it exists, hypothetically. This also helps explain these strange UFO sightings around nuclear bases. So there are 5 documented cases where nuclear missiles officers publicly claimed UFOs interfered with their launch systems. So these 5 cases are a very important piece of evidence that something happened. They're the strongest pieces of evidence UFO researchers point to, and the details are wild. Who are some of the researchers who go this direction? Well, there's several UFO researchers. They've explored the nuclear connection hypothesis. The idea that unexplained craft repeatedly appearing near nuclear weapon sites may indicate that they are keeping track of what is going on. They are continually updating their own understanding of how we are advancing in our nuclear capabilities, right? So it's useful to group them. Major researchers focus on the UFO nuclear connections are Robert Hastings, the most prominent researcher in this field. His book, UFO and the Nukes, just 2008. And he does have a documentary out, UFO and Nukes, The Secret Link Revealed. So he says over 150 former U.S. military personnel, including missile launch officers and the radar operators, have shared this information where UFOs appear at sites. Malmstrom Air Force Base is one, Minot Air Force Base is another, and the F.E. Warren Air Force Base is another place. So they claim that the missiles went offline, these witnesses. They say that when they noticed the anomaly, they also noticed that there were UFOs in the sky at the time that the anomaly happened. So that's interesting. Hastings interprets this as possible technological interference with our nuclear weapons. So Robert Salas, he's another one of the key eyewitnesses who is frequently cited. He was at Malmstrom Air Force Base, and I was 7 years old. That was 1967, man. He says, during the UFO sighting, the multiple nuclear missiles became inoperable altogether, all at once. Bam, just all of them shut off. You go, Holy crap. And that would scare the shit out of you. And it did him. Salas was not a happy man that night. You know, they become inoperable. That's not acceptable. What is going on? He even later testified at the National Press Club in 2010, along with other former officers, about this incident. So Richard Dolan, now he studies the historical and the intelligence aspects of UFO secrecy. His suggestion is that nuclear weapons may be a trigger for UFO monitoring. The more we try to use nuclear power or weapons, then the more interested the UFOs are in showing up, right? Governments might treat UFOs as strategic defense intelligence issues. So he connects UFO sightings to the Cold War nuclear arms race. Jacques Vallée is another UFO scholar and researcher. His approach about this phenomenon is a systems and intelligence perspective, and he doesn't think it's nuclear monitoring so much as the repeated sightings, and these sightings are usually near the military installation. So there's some kind of a connection with the UFOs interested in at least the military, right? He says the possible UFOs track technological milestones of civilizations. They're seeing how far we are advanced, right? Leslie Kean, she is the author of The UFOs, a very famous book on UFOs. She helped bring in the modern UAP issue into mainstream media. UFOs, generals, pilots, and government officials go on the record. And some of her testimonies are from military personnel. And some of those were near nuclear facilities when they had their experience. So there are several different people who have worked on this from a historical perspective and a living witness perspective of people who actually were there. So it kind of helps make the case more credible. Well, the skeptical researchers, they get their say too. They disagree with this connection, UFO nuclear. Now, it's not there. Of course, Mick West and the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry have also talked about missile shutdowns could be electrical faults. Although none were ever detected. I wonder why he ignores that, so far as I'm aware. And on the other hand, you say, yeah, well, you know, at a nuclear facility, if the electricity cuts out, do you really think they're going to tell the public? So, come on. I think that's a pretty valid point, right? They also say that eyewitness memory decades later may be unreliable. All right, there's no technical evidence that proves UFO interference. Technically correct. So here's the core debate, however. What we have is we have two different interpretations of this remarkable situation. Interpretation A is a strategic monitoring. They're here to just kind of look in on us and see what we're doing and potentially to see what we have now become capable of doing today, 2026, as opposed to back in, say, 1960. So they're keeping an eye on us because it's a planetary threat, nuclear weapons. The second interpretation is pattern illusion. And this is where the skeptics come in. They say, yeah, well, the nuclear bases are heavily surveyed and monitored anyway. And so you're going to get more aerial objects in your monitoring equipment. That's their option. Do we have a bottom line on this discussion? I don't know. The main researchers explored the UFO nuclear weapons include Robert Hastings and Robert Salas. You've got Richard Dolan. You've got Leslie Kean, a very famous UFO researcher. And you've got Jacques Vallée, who is world famous on this, right? So each one of them have a little bit different angle on this whole issue, right? Nobody is in lockstep agreement on any of it. You got the historical analysis, the journalism, the theoretical modeling. There's 3 historic moments when UFO sightings exploded immediately after a major nuclear event. Now, this is kind of an interesting pattern. 3 times in our history since the bomb was developed, we had 3 major nuclear events, and we had 3 very large upticks of UFO encounters. That's worth looking into, I would propose. We have 1945, 1962, and 1980s, in the early 1980s. This is strange. And this is why we all kind of get interested. The historians, especially Richard Dolan, really goes wacky over this. Can't blame him. And Robert Hastings, they are very interested in this. 1945-47. Well, that's our atomic age beginning. The first nuclear detonations occurred during Trinity nuclear tests and atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan. Immediately after this, UFO researchers note the first massive waves of modern UFO sightings. Kenneth Arnold had his UFO sighting, and we have the Roswell incident. Arnold's report is actually where the term flying saucers became popular. And researchers point out something interesting here, too. Many of these early sightings occurred near U.S. nuclear laboratories, Los Alamos National Laboratory especially, and that's Roswell happened out there, right? They may have triggered observation by unknown craft, these tests. And we had a lot of upper ground, above ground, on the ground tests. We actually begin to test them in the air, which is crazy. We didn't know any better. So the Cuban the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Chrysolmisis. Well, this is 1962. It's very interesting that this was the most dangerous nuclear standoff for history at the time, right? We came very, very close to World War over this issue. And during that same period, UFO researchers say there was another huge surge in reports of UFOs. But the most famous nuclear base case occurred a few years later at Malmstrom Air Force Base. According to testimony from former missile officers, a glowing object hovered near a missile site that was near them. Multiple nuclear missiles simultaneously went offline. They were just shut down. So Robert Hastings argues that this suggests possible interference with our nuclear systems. When we get to the Air Force investigations, they concluded that the missile failures were technical malfunctions. Of course they did. Are you kidding me? Nobody is going to want to claim responsibility for that. I'm just going down the practical road here, right? So, yeah. And then the early 1980s peak of nuclear tensions. These were the largest nuclear arsenals ever assembled anywhere. And major UFO cases occurred here. You have Rendlesham Forest incident, in fact, in 1980. This event happened near RAF Bentwaters. It is where the U.S. stored the nuclear weapons. Isn't that interesting? Don't know if you're aware of that or not. Several military personnel reported strange lights in the forest. There was seen a triangular craft, and there was unusual radiation readings. The incident remains one of the most famous military UFO cases in Europe. Notice it's not just here in America. You know, we've got Roswell. Well, we've got Roswell. Well, Europe has Rendlesham Forest, right? This is how it works. This is a worldwide phenomenon. So that's interesting. So why does this pattern matter? Well, Hastings and Dolan argue that the timeline suggests nuclear weapons now represent a planetary scale threshold for technology. Now that we've been evolving and getting smarter, we've built really interesting machines. We've got these automobiles now. We've got much better ships that go out on the ocean. The Wright brothers occurred. We got these bi-wing airplanes in the First World War, and then our airplanes turned into jets, and we keep making stuff bigger and better and more powerful, and they go faster and they go higher. And then we began developing rockets. And pretty soon we developed this nuclear bomb thing. And that's, I love how Richard Dolan put this. He said, look, when we became nuclearly real, powerful, capable, that's when we became interesting as a planetary species. And all of a sudden, bam, the UFOs show up. Because now interesting things can happen both for the positive and the negative on an Earth scale, not just within this tiny part of this little Earth over there, or something might happen over there. No, this now is Earth scale. And therefore they said, aha, we think the bugs are waking up. Let's go watch them. A very interesting speculation on Dolan's part, I think. So that's the nuclear monitoring hypothesis. So what makes this interesting is even the skeptics are going to admit something curious. The modern UFO era begins almost exactly when humanity first detonated our nuclear weapons. That is pretty much uncontested. Very interesting. So there are now also classified Soviet military reports that claim UFOs are appearing over Soviet nuclear missile bases. Guess when? 1970s and 1980s. Again, pretty much the same era, maybe even more heavily over the Soviet than the American, right? The really remarkable thing, I'm going to say this part out loud right now. I don't know where in my notes I have this, but these are part of the Russian files that the world famous George Knapp UFO researcher went to Russia and stole and came back with them. It is their nuclear issues with the UFOs that he got. So we've got very interesting Soviet evidence right now, extremely interesting Soviet evidence. Let's take a look at this. Wow. Both sides of the Cold War, both sides of the nuclear Cold War is being monitored carefully. Really remarkable. And we've got the actual documentation. Knapp, talk about having the cojones. I'm just saying. Had he been caught, oh my Lord, we wouldn't have ever seen him again. Can you imagine being caught in a foreign country with top secret classified government Soviet documents? I don't care what you think of him. Total respect for George Knapp. I'm just saying, come on, give the man a star. Seriously. Because now this is where the story gets really intriguing. We're going to look at him. His Russian UFO files. He got him in the early 1990s. Now see, so that means they were like 10 years old, 10, maybe 15 years old is all. Just fresh, because this was happening in the 1970s and 80s, right? Well, Knapp brought them back in the 1990s, and he didn't dare show them. And this was after the collapse of the Soviet Union, right? So, according to Knapp, he got them, and he's got YouTube videos on this. In fact, I think he's made these Soviet papers available. Now, I mean, I would suppose I have not looked into this like I've wanted to. I don't know if someone is translating them from the Russian, but you could do that with AI potentially to at least get the gist of what they're all about. I do believe Knapp has made those all publicly available. I really need to, I want to get in those and take a look at these. This is really interesting. I'm just basing this on other reports. Like from George Knapp, he said he got them from a former KGB source traveling in Russia in 1993. These are Soviet military UFO reports. They are intelligence summaries, though, pilot encounters with their airplane pilots, jet pilots, and the alleged nuclear base incidents. And Soviet UFO investigation programs. There were multiple Soviet secret UFO programs. Now, what's this telling us? You know, everybody will say, yeah, you guys are nuts. You're just nut jobs out there bouncing around in the street. What good are you to society believing in something that is so obviously fake? Well, we know our government has spent hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars with air defense. Have you ever asked yourself why? Obviously, you dork. Soviet Union's doing the same thing. Have you ever asked why? Reagan told, who was it, Gorbachev? It's public. I listened to the video here. It's been a while. Where he says, well, you know, if, that was his impetus for Star Wars, or whatever the hell he called it. The defense system for space. Well, I would hope that if we really do get something from the sky, the UFOs, that we could join with the Russians to protect ourselves. You think he was just flapping his gums? No, they knew about this stuff, man. Very interesting, just remarkable. So anyway, there are multiple secret UFO programs. There's the Network AN, 1979, the Galaxy MD, 1981 to 85. That was a 4-year program. You have the Pluton 7, 1989 to 1990, and then you have the Thread 3, which was a later program. They reportedly investigated thousands of sightings and compiled intelligence reports in unexplained aerial phenomenon. There's an Institute 22 research project, 1978, the Soviet Academy of Sciences and the Ministry of Defense. What they did is they combined their talents. They analyzed the UFO reports from soldiers, the reports from the pilots, and the reports from the radar operators, because radar operators and pilots would probably be working in tandem. So those reports would be very valuable for this kind of an analysis. So unlike the stereotype that the USSR ignored UFOs, these documents prove that they took the issue very seriously indeed. They studied them for decades. And technically, there's no evidence at all that they've ever stopped, as far as that goes. There was a 1982 Soviet nuclear missile incident, and that's one of the dramatic claims, October 1982. They went over a Soviet ICBM base. The systems that launched the missiles activated, and they couldn't turn them off. And then the mission launch codes began showing up on the control panel, and no one else was interacting with it. And the actual launch codes show up on these monitors, and it made them crap their pants, and the missiles entered launch-ready status. It took them all the way up to where we're ready to go, boys. It just scared them spitless. They were terrified. They immediately called the United States because, everybody monitors everybody. They know when you turn the system on. And they immediately called the United States. If I remember the story right, they said, hey, it's not us. We're not going to launch. We're not going to launch. Something really messed up is going on here. It's not us. It's not us. We don't have any control over this, man. They were terrified. This was a really serious breach of protocol. And then the launch system returned back to normal. At the same time, there were UFOs outside the base at the ICBM area. Knapp told a U.S. Congress hearing that the incident allegedly brought the Soviet Union seconds away from World War III. So now that's interesting because this was the same idea, but the opposite that happened at Malmstrom Air Force Base in 1967. In their case, they were all shut down. Can't use one of them. You're sitting ducks in the water. Well, that's equally as terrifying. If the Soviets know that your missiles can't work, hot dog, we've got a free gift. We get to go take America, right? Pretty scary stuff. And then there was a UFO combat incident that was reported in the Soviets. Soldiers fired a missile at a UFO and the craft crashed. Strange beings allegedly emerged. A CIA report summarizing the KGB account even claimed a mysterious energy burst turned several soldiers into a stone-like substance. Wow. You can see the impressive progression of the story, can't you? Yeah. Unless it really happened. So historians note this story likely originated in tabloid or secondary sources. Yeah, I should say so. So there is a key pattern, though, in these Soviet files. There's one consistent theme, and it spiked in the 1970s with the UFOs sightings increase. They reported that the UFO sightings and interactions increased greatly after 1978. Yeah, that fits perfect. Cold War nuclear tensions, expansion of Soviet missile programs. And I mean, we and them, it was a Cold War. We were piling on the munitions like crazy. Not only nuclear, but chemical weapons of mass destruction. We were doing all kinds of crazy crap. They were building new radar and space tracking systems, right? So they needed a better detection technology, not necessarily more UFOs. That is the context of the Soviet end. We find the same context here on the American end. So now, of course, there are historians and scientists who say, all right, hold on, let's stay cautious here. Several issues exist with the Russian files. Some documents are translations of translations. Now, that's a legitimate point, right? I mean, because, and to use an analogy, and I'm not trying to diss the Bible, and I am not trying to diss religion, but let's get real for just a moment. What we have in the Bible is, at minimum, a translation of a translation and a copy of a copy of a copy over hundreds, if not thousands of times. So there are issues with translation, is what I'm telling you. That's a legit issue. And they also say that the original archival sources, well, those aren't always available. They're missing. Soviet intelligence sometimes circulated disinformation internally. No. What? We thought our government had the monopoly on disinformation. Nope. Soviets are just as big a disinformation pigs as the American government. So there you have that. So the critics always also argue that it's true the Soviets did study the UFOs. There's no question about that. But the extraordinary claims inside the files, we have no way of verifying that. So that's their stance. So when we look at the historical strength or weakness of this whole thing, let's look at the historical solidity. Even the skeptics can agree on a few things. Number one, the Soviet Union did run large UFO investigation programs. They were taking it serious too. The other thing is that thousands of sightings were documented by the military when they experienced it. And like I said, they talked to radar personnel, to the actual pilots, different kinds of experiencers with a different context. And the Cold War produced many radar anomalies and satellite launches that confused observers. So one famous Soviet UFO in 1977, this is let's see if I can pronounce this right, the Petrozavodsk, yikes, the Petrozavodsk phenomenon. Yeah, that one. It was likely caused by a rocket launch and satellite activity. Well, it was initially triggered major government concern, though, because they probably are drawing upon previous UFO experience, possibly, So the bottom line, Knapp's Russian files are exquisite. They do show that the Soviet Union seriously investigated UFO reports, including incidents allegedly occurring near nuclear facilities. But, I get it, there's always a but. Many claims remain unverified intelligence reports. Some possibly misidentify the military tests or satellite launches. All right, that's legit, true. Others are still unexplained, but they're not necessarily terrestrial. That's fair. One more fascinating Cold War twist. Oh, there's nothing better than ice water, is there? Both the United States and the Soviet Union secretly suspected that the UFOs might be the other side's advanced technology. So for decades, the U.S. wondered if the Soviets, and the Soviets wondered if it's the U.S. And this created one of the strangest intelligence puzzles of the entire Cold War. There are declassified CIA analyses from the 1950s, and these are the documents that I looked at. They are declassified on the government website. I'll give you the number of it. That actually considered UFOs a possible national security threat on par with nuclear weapons. And they are astonishing. There are 3 major U.S. government studies in the early Cold War. They're genuine, they're declassified records showing how seriously intelligence agencies took the UFO issue in the 1950s. There is the Robertson Panel Report of 1953. Now, the most famous CIA analysis is this Robertson Panel. The CIA organized it. And this was because, get this, the reason they put together this Robertson Panel to investigate UFOs is because in 1952, and it was put together in 1952, remember what happened in 1952? The UFOs by the dozens flew over the White House for hours, and everybody saw it. And it scared the bejesus out of everybody. They said, holy crap, we've got to study this. And they put together this Robertson study. People say, well, why don't they just come and park on the White House lawn? They already showed up at the frickin' White House, and there were hundreds and thousands of witnesses, and none of us believe that story. Isn't that remarkable? That's interesting. Perhaps we take our skepticism too far. I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there for you to consider. So Howard Robertson was the chair. And of course, the universities and the various different types of defensive job analysts and all those guys, all of those types of people were on this panel, right? Why the CIA convened it was the 1952 Washington, D.C. UFO incident at the National Airport as well, and on radar near the Andrews Air Force Base, as well as the White House. Are they trying to say, hi, boys? Well, they scrambled jet fighters, no doubt about it. And this caused major concern in the intelligence community. So the conclusion was interesting because they said, well, most of the sightings have a conventional explanation. So they don't appear to be direct extraterrestrial craft. However, they created a national security problem, and that is key. Nobody just flies around the way. I double dog dare you, go grab your drone, put her on up there by the White House. Right out, swing around the yard a few times outside with your drone. You just go right ahead and see what it'll get you, right? Nobody flies drones or discs around the White House, but these were there. Or the Air Force bases, right? Except the New Jersey drones from last year. And I've actually had people tell me, Shirts, you're sure dance, because they're still flying around New Jersey. It's just that the news stopped talking about them. Interesting. Anybody from New Jersey, leave a comment in the chat, would you? Let me know. Are you still seeing a bunch of drones? Because, I mean, they are right about one thing. Nobody's talking about drones over anything. I heard that in Europe and over there in England, they are having a lot of drones too. But nobody's going to pick up the story. So that's very interesting. Anyway, their concern was unexpected. See, they worried that the Soviet Union could exploit the UFO hysteria. Now, here comes a key factor in United States government paranoia. Pay attention to this. I think this is a key pivot point here. The radical, numerous occurrence of UFOs right at the White House and the Air Force bases and the military. I mean, this blew them away. And they said, no, wait a minute. This could be a serious problem for national security. And if it's the Soviets, what if they can use this as a way to make it far more difficult for us to intercommunicate with our military needs? And this caused them serious concern. They said, wait, man, what if they overload the radar networks? What if they clog military communications electronically, see? What if they create public panic? That would be enough to really disrupt our country. And so they recommended a public debunking campaign against UFOs. And the rest is history. My God, they're still doing that campaign splendiferously until the last 5 years. And now they want with every fiber of their being to convince us the UFOs are real. The government wants us to say, damn straight, zero doubt, they're real. Carl Nell, Gary, what's his nose? The scientist. Nolan. Sorry, Gary. I mean, no disrespect. So, I mean, this thing is amazing. Now, the CIA UFO intelligence study in 1952, this was before the Robertson panel. The CIA produced another fascinating internal report about flying saucers. And they talked to military pilots, radar operators, intelligence sources, and it found that these discs went at extreme speed. They had unusual maneuverability, and the objects tracked simultaneously with people watching them as well as on radar. They were identified, the people that were watching them were describing, yeah, this thing is flying off in the east. And on the radar screen at the same time, they could see the thing taking off on the east, to the east. So one line of the document stands out here. The objects exhibit characteristics beyond the performance of any known aircraft. That was their determination. So that's why UFO researchers cited the document so often. But the CIA did not claim that this meant extraterrestrial intelligence, however. You got to understand that. They said, well, they blamed it on everything else. Soviet secret technology, atmospheric phenomenon, unknown natural processes. After Roswell, it became weather balloons, right? So we have another report, the final report, the Brookings Institute report of 1960. This is also mentioned. This was prepared by NASA back when it was a half-assed decent agency. It explored how humanity might react to discovering extraterrestrial intelligence. And they said, well, if we confirm alien life is real, this is going to destabilize the religions, it's going to disrupt our social institutions, and it's going to create political upheaval, and therefore they squelched it. Now, they decided what would be best for us. I don't know about that. Now, this isn't specifically about UFO sightings as such, though. It shows how seriously the government considered the societal impacts of extraterrestrial discovery. What they actually reveal, though, is really interesting. In the early Cold War, intelligence agencies viewed UFOs as a potential national security issue for three reasons. It was going to disrupt and interfere with our radar. It was going to overwhelm our air defenses, and it was psychological warfare. The Soviet Union is going to now realize 1952, you got these saucers all over the White House. You got them over the Air Force bases and all the military installations. It caused panic. They had genuine hysteria. And that is what they were afraid the Soviets were going to create. And therefore they said, let's knock out the interest in this right now. Let's knock it down. We don't want any information out about it. Call everyone who believes in this a genuine kook, destroy their jobs, etc. We've got to knock this down. And that's where all that came from. Genuine UFO experiences made it so that our government became so damn secret that you couldn't even say the word until 5 years ago. Right? Interesting. So, why is the 1952-53 period so intense? The North American Aerospace Defense Command had just been created. They had a continental-wide, for the first time, a continental-wide from coast to coast radar defense network. That's why they were so anxious about the security. And they had early nuclear missile warning systems because some yo-yo nut leaked the nuclear secrets from America over to the Soviet Unions, and they also were building bombs. Therefore, we had to have radar on both coasts in the south and up in the north. We had to completely enmesh America with radar system that could detect these in case the Soviets shot at us. And the Soviets were in the same conundrum. Welcome to the Cold War in the 1950s. So that's why they said the UFOs are an intelligence level urgency, not a intelligence. What's the word I'm looking for? I just had a brain fart. not the alien emergency, the interstellar alien emergency. That was not where the concern was. The concern was for the safety of the nation from the Soviets using the UFO experience for damaging our new radar detecting technology and our new nuclear bombs and missiles. That's where the concern was emphasized. Very interesting. These are a strategic intelligence problem, in other words, not an extraterrestrial problem. And they never did reach any conclusion to the extraterrestrial idea. That also was extremely interesting. So, oh my gosh, I'm only halfway through this. Are you guys good for another little while? I put a lot of stuff together on purpose. All of this explains, all of this is the background for Lue Elizondo. I'm not kidding. In a most interesting, remarkable way. Okay, well, a few of you are saying yes. Oh, okay, good. Well, I know there's some people out there who do 5-hour live sessions. I have never done a 5-hour long session. I'm not about to now, but I'm at an hour and a half, so I've got another hour and a half. So, okay, well, you want me to keep going? I'll be happy to. I hope I'm not putting you to sleep. On the other hand, you're having fun talking about other stuff in the chat, right? Okay, so, yeah, you can always come back and watch the video later. I think this is really important information, and it's quite frankly fascinating. Now that I'm through a lot of that historic stuff, when I start getting into the analysis of the background of who the whistleblowers are and who the disinformation agents are, this will tie it all in. So anyway, no more explaining, just keep reading. Okay. We're going to keep going, man. Okay, so we have a little known CIA memo from 1952. Nobody talks about it a lot. It says that the UFO sightings could potentially, quote, clog U.S. air defense channels during an attack, unquote. That was their concern. It's going to interrupt our capability to defend our country. That was their concern in 1952. So they worried that UFO reports might blind the radar network during a Soviet nuclear strike. So that Cold War fear, that played a huge role in the government's decision to downplay UFO reports publicly. It's in the actual language from the Cold War documents that we see why intelligence agencies became worried. And how does Lue Elizondo fit into that? So, the CIA Flying Saucers Intelligence Study, the memo was circulated inside the CIA and the United States Air Force. A key passage essentially, which I'll paraphrase, the continued reporting of these particular type of phenomenon could result in mass hysteria, and they could clog channels of communications that are vital for us to keep open during a defense to the United States. Now, there was another strategic defense that concerned them here. During a time of emergency, enemy forces might exploit the UFO phenomena to overload our early warning systems, which are necessary because that still gives us time to prepare if an attack is being made. And so we're worried about our early warning systems. You know, we've got several across the United States. So in other words, intelligence planners worried about something very practical here. They weren't worried about, oh my gosh, these are extraterrestrial intelligent civilizations coming to enslave us like they did anciently with Nibiru and Marduk coming down and the Anunnaki making us dig gold for them. None of that was on these guys' mind. It was purely practical. They said false radar alerts during a nuclear attack scenario, that is what concerned them. Because they had just built back then, expensive for them back then, the first continental air defense network. Well, they wanted to protect their investment, of course. So the United States feared Soviet long-range bombers carrying nuclear weapons. If radar operators began reporting hundreds of mysterious objects, commanders fear that command centers might become overwhelmed, while real bombers might slip through the confusion. So these UFO reports, they were viewed as a potential vulnerability in our nuclear defense. Now that's important. So the Robertson panel recommendation, this was the 1953 CIA Robertson panel, they recommended something surprising. The government should actively reduce public interest in UFOs. And that is what happened. So they proposed using media and scientists and educational campaigns to explain sightings away. The reasoning was strategic, not in danger of becoming enslaved by a superior species from outer space. None of the documents we have that are declassified even hint that was their reason. This is why they downplayed the UFOs, not because they had crashed aircraft and they were operating on alien bodies and remaking the alien aircraft. None of that was in these documents. What is in the documents is too many UFO reports could overwhelm military communication systems that they had just installed in the United States. That is vital to recognize. And then the famous Washington UFO incident in 1952, a year earlier, these fears really exploded after that event. And the CIA said, holy cow, objects appeared simultaneously on radar near Washington National Airport, the White House, Andrews Air Force Base. Jets were scrambled multiple nights in a row because from the point of view of the intelligence officers that were seeing all of these things in so many different locations, this demonstrated how quickly the radar network could become pure chaos. And that terrified them. And so they did something about it. Remove the chaos, downplay the UFOs. Well, modern military UFO investigations. We have David Grush, Lue Elizondo, Gary Nolan. Elizondo said his work in Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, ATIP. Notice what ATIP actually stands for. And I get it. There's controversy over whether he was even there or not. I get that. That's not the issue at this point. Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. It focused on unidentified craft entering restricted airspace, potential national security implications. That's the CIA in the 1950s all over again, isn't it? Now, that's quite remarkable. You say, whoa, they never lost the original concern. No aliens. This is not about aliens. It's about airspace intrusion and defense vulnerability. Very interesting. How does this connect to the so-called legacy program debate? Well, if a long-running classified effort exists, what some whistleblowers call a legacy program, the logic would look like this. In the 1950s, we had UFO sightings treated as air defense threat. Okay, and we've got the declassified documents that I've been reading to you. In the 1960s to the 1980s, we have Cold War monitoring of unknown aerial objects, and we weren't sure if it was theirs or not, or if it was a legitimate UFO. So that actually added a layer of complexity to the radar and defense issues. From the 2000s to our day right now, we have the modern UFO analysis programs. So someone like Elizondo in that scenario, he might simply be working in the modern continuation of the same national security concern. Not necessarily a crash retrieval program, which is what UAP Gerb is saying he thinks now Elizondo was a part of, and he could have been. I'm not saying Gerb is right or wrong. I'm just saying this issue has been raised now, but Elizondo doesn't talk about that aspect at all. His concern is with a threat assessment program. Now, and you say, well, he could be holding it back. That is true. He could be. But until we have the evidence, we have to go with what we have and recognize that, well, he could be involved in the legacy program is a speculation, not a fact. That I'm good with. Okay, so the two competing interpretations. There's two camps. Today's research splits into the continuity theory. The Pentagon has quietly studied UFOs for 70 plus years, or the program evolved, but the mission remains to protect U.S. airspace. And the interpretation B is the hidden technology theory. This is our favorite, right? Some believe these programs eventually discovered non-human craft, and that led to deeper secret programs, and we're actually building these craft now, and ta-da, that's our TRS-B3, whatever you call it. And all of that remains unverified. So what's the bottom line? Well, the 1952 CI memo and the Robertson panel shows that UFO sightings were taken seriously as Cold War defense issue, not Cold War extraterrestrial alien coming to get us issue. Just about defense. So intelligence agencies feared that their systems would get clogged with too many signals, especially during a nuclear attack, right? And so they said reduce the public interest. This context helps explain why modern investigators like Lue Elizondo framed the topic primarily as national security, not as extraterrestrials. That's a very interesting way to look at this. So there's a 1970s Pentagon directive about unidentified objects near nuclear weapons facilities that almost nobody talks about. What this essentially ordered is all sightings are to be immediately forwarded through classified channels of any UFOs. If that directive still exists today, from the 1970s to today, it would explain exactly why the UFO sightings around nuclear bases keep appearing in the classified reports, because they're still showing up at the nuclear facilities. Maybe the missing link between the 1950s CIA concerns and our modern UFO programs. Who knows? Now, I haven't found a clean 1970 Pentagon document or directive that specifically says UFOs near nuclear weapons facilities must be forwarded through classified channels. I haven't found something saying that. What I did find is the closest documented backbone for this idea, and it's a declassified document. The name of this document, you can look it up and read it yourself. I don't know if Do I have access to that? I might. I'll tell you what, I'll leave a link. I'll leave a link in the video, in the description of the video here, so that you guys can go look at these documents. I'll do that. I should have thought about putting them up, but you're not going to read them anyway. It's all good. It's called JANAP, JANAP 146/service CIRVIS. Now, this is a joint U.S. Canadian military reporting instruction. And the point of this instruction is for vital intelligence sightings. So it lists missiles as vital sightings to report. If you see missiles, report them. And it says unidentified flying objects, UFOs, in this report. And it was highly classified. See, back then, you couldn't even say UFO, man. They'd come after you. You were thought Looney Tune. That requires prompt transmission to military authorities. It gives those reports the emergency and urgent precedence, and it warns that they contain national defense information. So this gives us a real declassified framework for how the unusual UFO views and discoveries, etc., the experiences of seeing a UFO in the sky, they could move quickly into restricted channels without there being a public UFO office. In other words, the government, and we've all known this for quite a while, this is the way the government has acquired all the vast UFO files that they keep denying exist. Hopefully they weren't dumbasses enough to destroy all that evidence. We could learn patterns and places, etc., if they had half a brain and kept them. But our government is so blasted incompetent, it wouldn't surprise me if they stupidly threw them away. So here's the deep dive. The document, JANAP 146. Its stated purpose is to provide uniform instructions for reporting information of vital importance to the security of the United States and their forces, and to pass these reports to the appropriate military authorities. So inside the service section, the items to be reported include aircraft, whether they're coming against the United States or Canada, missiles, and the third item, aircraft, missiles. The third item, unidentified flying objects. That's how important they were. Not because they thought they were extraterrestrial alien civilizations, but because they were a threat to our national security and our communication systems. Hostile or unidentified submarines, suspicious unconventional craft, and any unusual activity that might indicate a possible attack. It says these reports should go out with urgency and emergency procedure, and that handlers must make positive, immediate delivery. Don't fart around with this stuff. Share the information quick so that we can act on it in a timely manner. It further states the reports contain information affecting national defense, and unauthorized disclosure can trigger prosecution. So do it, man. Well, the documented mechanism is not a UFO directive for nukes. It is a defense intelligence rapid reporting channel. And it's true, it does include UFOs and missiles in this same alert architecture that they had developed to communicate back and forth. And so this is why researchers connect that to nuclear bases. Isn't that interesting? The bridge to nuclear facilities comes from later law and later reporting requirements. The FY 2022 NDAA, language behind the Aero Office, that specifically requires reporting and descriptions of UFO incidents involving military nuclear assets, including strategic nuclear weapons and nuclear-powered ships and submarines. Facilities tied to the production, the transportation, or the storage of nuclear weapons or components, and nuclear power/fuel facilities regulated by the NRC. That means in modern law, the nuclear-related UFO incidents are explicitly a reportable category to Congress. Interesting. So the historical through line is pretty strong. Early Cold War, UFOs were treated as defense intelligence reporting problem, not just a curiosity. They took them seriously and for very powerful practical reasons. Now, when you get up into the mid-Cold War era, the UFOs and missiles already sitting in the same rapid reporting framework through JANAP and Service, that's CIRVIS, and in the modern era, we have Congress formally requiring accounting for UFOs involving nuclear weapons, assets, and facilities. The CIA piece that explains why this got stovepiped, their own public historical write-up says the agency's early concern was national security, mainly fear that UFO reports might represent new Soviet weapons. So it also says that the CIA worried that the Soviets could exploit the UFO reports to create panic and, in a worst-case scenario, to overload the United States air warning system so it could not distinguish real targets from false ones. And this is the real juice here, because once you view the phenomenon through that lens, the reporting pipeline makes perfect sense. Not aliens, air defense, strategic warning, potential adversary exploiting of the UFO phenomenon against us. That's what we want to prevent. That's what concerns us. Was there such a mechanism after Blue Book? And, that ended in 1969, right? I mean, that's the official ending of it, they say. The regulations controlling and establishing UFO investigation programs, those were rescinded, but that doesn't mean that all reporting of unusual aerial events ended, not by any means. Two important things remain true. First, we have these documents that have been declassified. The JANAP and Service, or CIRVIS, CIRVIS, material shows that military and intelligence communication side, they still had the way to move the UFO reports as vital sightings, so that didn't disappear. We know it did continue past 1969 without question. And the second is the modern DOD, the Department of Defense reporting, clearly did continue, but just in classified channels, because the OVNI Aero reports state additional information sits in the classified version of their annual report. And those statutes explicitly include nuclear asset categories. So, our best evidence-based formulation is going to be this. Blue Book, that's the public face, let the whole public see our investigating program on UFOs. All of that ended. Dang it, we're left out. But the classified operations reportings of unknowns in sensitive defense contexts did not end. they kept going. And what this suggests about Lue Elizondo is exquisitely interesting now, because what was he actually up to in this context? Based on the public documentary record, the safest inference is not to say that he was definitely in a crash retrieval legacy program. That's the wrong direction, in my opinion. We do not have public proof of that. What we do have is a long institutional tradition of handling these weird objects that we don't know what are as national security reporting, and we use them as threat analysis programs. And that is exactly what ATIP was supposed to be, that Lue was in. So Lue's public framing from his own point of view actually makes a lot more sense to us when we place him in this line. 1950s of the CIA, we have unknowns, and those could threaten our strategic warning systems. Okay. Then we have the Janap service era. This is where the UFO is treated as urgent vital intelligence sightings, as could missiles or other aerial dynamics. And then we have the Aero and the ODNI era, where the UFOs continue to be tracked as safety, surveillance, and potentially adversary problems if something like that arises, including around nuclear-related assets. So the most evidence-ground hypothesis is this one that I'm going to present. Elizondo may have been operating inside the modern threat assessment / reporting tradition. And the reason he was operating under that was because the anomalies that happen into sensitive military airspace is not necessarily inside a proven crash retrieval compartment. Now, that doesn't rule out that there could have been deeper departments. I mean, the legacy could be a deeper one. I get that. But our evidence for that doesn't exist. I'm going with what we actually have on ground right now. The public record currently supports this idea. So there really is a real declassified historical architecture with these declassified documents and the descriptions of the CIA in the 1950s, and they're concerned because we all, us and the Soviets and everyone else, Europe, everybody was new to this nuclear weapons situation, right? So we were all trying to figure out the logistics of, man, how do we keep ourselves safe from this beast, right? So with that idea, when it comes to the nuclear assets and facilities, what is not established in the public documentary record is a specific 1970s Pentagon nuclear UFO directive in the exact form that people often describe. We also don't have proof that Elizondo was inside a crash retrieval legacy program. We just don't. He could have been. I'm not saying that proves he wasn't. No way. We don't know. And this is actually more interesting to me because it suggests the secrecy may have come less from one mythical memo and more from an entire embedded reporting culture that the entire government organized in order to remain safe and be able to use our air defense and our strategic warning system that we went from coast to coast. It was brand new and we were damn proud of it, but we wanted to protect it, right? and the intelligence channels keeping open the idea that if you see anything, you report it immediately so that we can keep the lines clear. That's critical. Now, in regard to all of this, as another context, which is really important, is this 2027 idea. Jeremy Corbell says it's a big lie. 2027 is going to come, and they're going to say a great big UFO mothership is coming after us. And it's huge. It's huge. Oh, it's so huge. No, I mean, this is huge. This is really big. And it's coming for us. Now, Corbell says that's a lie. Well, recently, Lue Elizondo has been pegged to be the one guilty of starting that kind of disinformation rumor. So, and I've made a couple of videos on this, but I wanted to look a little deeper into it and examine. There's been, within the last, month and a half or so, there's been 5, 6, 7 different YouTube videos. Some of them have had different guests on, and they've been analyzing different bits of information that we have found, trying to trace where did this idea start and who is involved with it and why did it start. And now Lue Elizondo has been accused of being the originator, and it is because he is a disinformation agent. So, I mean, and he very well could be. I don't have enough evidence either way. But he's been accused of being a disinformation agent, not letting us know that he was in the legacy program. And now he's being accused of being the disinformation agent of starting the 2027 UFO mothership rumor. And I've said it, and I will continue saying it. I just want to find out what's real. So let's take a look at this, because I discovered some remarkably interesting things that I missed the first time, and that I missed the second time, and that I missed the third time. So I keep going. I keep checking into the evidence. I keep checking all the clues. I overturn every rock, because you never know where the next bit of information can show up that will completely renovate your theory. And that's pretty important. So, Jeremy Corbell and George Knapp. Governments are preparing the public for a major UFO event, possibly involving a large craft or mothership, sometime around 2027. That's the claim. So the first important point to recognize is there is currently no publicly verifiable evidence supporting this claim. No government document. There's no intelligence memo. There's no intelligence leak. There's no official report that confirms this in any manner that we can find. So for right now, we would say this fits in a speculatory class, not evidence. That's what I would say. This is rumor in UFO media. Now, could UFO stories be a strategic cover? Now, that's a real hypothesis discussed by historians of UFOs and intelligence gathering, etc. During the Cold War, for instance, governments, they allowed the UFO rumors to circulate because it protected their classified technology programs that they were doing with the radar systems covering and our new bombs and our new jets, etc. So, oh yeah, the UFOs, it's them. That's actually on historical record. A famous example involves Lockheed's U-2. Flying in the 1950s, civilians saw objects at extremely high altitude. It reflected the sunlight. And so they said, wow, we're seeing mysterious lights in the sky. What could it be? And the CIA later said there were many UFO sightings in the 1950s that were actually our own U-2s on test flights. Now, that's an important context, right? So sometimes UFO explanations helped hide real military programs. But UFO incidents, they were also genuinely reported. I'm not saying they weren't, but some of them were ours, even back in the 1950s. So at the same time, we now know that many sightings were taken seriously by military investigators, and we've seen that that's not only here at home, but abroad in the Soviet Union as well. The 1952 Washington, D.C. UFO incident. Multiple radar cases were studied in the Project Blue Book, and even skeptical investigators admitted some cases were unexplained. The majority of them, though, really have turned out to be rather blasé and normal, right? So there was a small percentage that were called unknown in Project Blue Book, right? Now, that doesn't mean extraterrestrial. It simply means insufficient data to identify the object, and they did label it that, right? So what the CIA and Air Force actually believed, let's look at this. Declassified materials now instruct us that intelligence agencies had three possibilities that they worked with. Misidentified natural phenomena, balloons, meteors, atmospheric effects. Today we have satellites as well, right? The second one, they had secret aircraft programs like the U-2. And later, it was the Lockheed SR-71 Blackbird that was also seen. And then the third possibility is possible adversary technology. It's the Soviets, right? So the extraterrestrial hypothesis, what I'm saying is, was not the working assumption. Now, that's interesting. The vast majority of the investigations of the 1950s, the 1960s, potentially up to the 1970s, were not because they were UFO looking. Very interesting. This is the arena of information of the CIA and Air Force from publicly available declassified documents that we can all read now. This is not speculation. So what does the UFO cover-up really mean? Most historians think the cover-up had different purposes than many of us who believe in UFOs think. The secrecy probably protected classified radar capabilities. We know that's the case, as well as experimental aircraft, and we know that's the case, and nuclear defense systems, which obviously makes perfect sense, as well as the surveillance technology we have with our cameras, which also makes good sense. So my point is the secrecy may have been about human technology, not extraterrestrial technology, not alien spacecraft. Interesting. So where does our modern UFO research fit? Now, the ATIP program, the ARROW program, the various agencies identify objects because that they might represent foreign drones. It might be unknown atmospheric phenomenon. It might be sensor artifacts or other aerial technology, but it's all about security and safety in the air. That's the concern, not UFOs. So are they even real? I think they are, absolutely. Unidentified flying objects, or if you want, aerial phenomena, UAPs, Those actually do exist. Pilots and radar operators sometimes observe objects they can't explain immediately. That doesn't automatically mean they're extraterrestrial, though. I want to throw that in. Just because we can't define it or explain it doesn't mean, oh, aliens from Zeta Reticuli, the tall Nordic whites are coming in. No, that's not what that means. That is not the logical jump at all. Aliens are always going to be, simply because of the nature of being an extraordinary claim, they are going to be the very last thing we jump to as an explanation. By simple logic, that should be obvious. So we don't know what it is yet. That's a UFO. So UFOs rumor secret or mask the rumors of secret technology. That's important. It investigates genuine unknown sightings of the various intelligence agencies, but they don't necessarily think they're all UFOs, as we are well aware of by now for sure. And of course, there is a mysterious cover-up, because that's what they do. They cover stuff up and they don't tell us. And that's maddening. I get it. But that's how it works. The bottom line is, some UFO stories actually helped us hide secret technology, which kept us ahead of the curve of the Soviets and the Chinese or whoever the opponent was. And therefore, it was very beneficial to let the myth provide that cover. In many instances, that actually happened. Some sightings, though, are real, but they are unexplained. There is no verified evidence at all that we're aware of alien craft or a coming mothership event in 2027. We do have 3 specific UFO cases, however, that are still debated because they involve radar. They have several different people who experienced them, and there are aircraft intercepts of these objects. And Lue Elizondo is an interesting link here. What we have on the airwaves of YouTube and elsewhere is the exact point where rumor begins. We know now how evidence starts to get tangled with gossip. And it's all on YouTube, or a lot of it, I should say. Probably TikTok and Facebook and Instagram and all that kind of stuff. This is how the story grows in our UFO community, because that is exactly what it's doing. And to be aware of that is to arm ourselves with some logic and rational ability that is invaluable for every field of endeavor in our entire lives. So I like sharing this type of stuff with people because it helps us become better, more careful thinkers, and that's critical. Make no mistake about it, I really would like the UFOs and I really would like the aliens to be real. But it's got to be on a valid basis, not rumor, not gossip, not second and third hand information. And that is all we have at this point. Collectively, no one ever on national television has ever shown us any alien spacecraft or body. That's what I mean. Okay? Just so we know. The 2027 timeline rumor is not straightforward. The chain looks like this. Elizondo made vague comments about humanity being on a timeline. And this is a favorite UFO theme on YouTube, right? Oh, well, which timeline are we in, right? Well, Lue Elizondo plays that game for learning more about the UFOs, right? Some interviewers pressed him about future revelations, and online commentators have then said, hey, because of what Lue said, there are specific dates that's involved, and 2027 is one of those dates. So that's the important part. Elizondo himself has never said a UFO mothership arrives in 2027. Nowhere. Prove me wrong. Prove me wrong. So the rumor is an interpretation that's layered on top of ambiguous statements. And this is what I've uncovered by going through several different YouTube videos. The actual Elizondo statements that triggered the speculation, he says stuff like this. He says, well, humanity may soon face a paradigm shifting realization, right? Or people should be prepared for new information. I've heard him say the truth may be difficult for some people to accept. And of course, that fuels speculation. Every one of those sentences fuels speculation. But they're not the same as predicting a specific event or date by any means. So, especially around Elizondo, we can expect that there's going to be a lot of speculation, right? Just because of the nature of his background and where he's at today and the experience that he went through to get to being a public UFO advocate today. Of course, there's going to be a lot of speculation. This is not rocket science to figure that out, right? That does not take a PhD in math to figure out, right? So his former intelligence role, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, see, he knows more than he can say, and he says less than he ought to. But he does have clearances that prevent him from it. Of course, someone's going to bring in information to fill any gaps Elizondo creates. That makes perfect sense. So, he has security clearances. He often answers questions indirectly. Have you noticed that? I mean, everybody complains about his method, but let's hear him out for a second. He says things like, well, there are things I cannot discuss. Yeah, damn, I was hoping you could. This creates a vacuum that speculation fills, of course. And what we want is a better story. There's nothing new. We want something new, damn you. Give us something new, Lue. And he can't. He's held back by his NDAs and stuff. Well, then what good are you? We want something new. And so we begin to re-understand, redefine certain words, or reinterpret ideas that may not be right. And that's something that people hate to hear, but that's what we do all the time in this community. You get a hint, then you speculate, then that turns into a rumor, and now you have inside information. Could a mothership narrative be deliberate messaging? Remember when I said governments sometimes allow certain stories to circulate because they distract from a secret defensive weapon that they're making or an offensive weapon that they're making? Who's to say they're not doing that right now with the current narrative, right? Secret aircraft development, electronic warfare systems, surveillance platforms. Mysterious narratives can serve strategic purposes, and so that's one reason for keeping the narratives mysterious. Yeah, because they know we're going to fill out all the details and ain't none of it going to be accurate, but they don't mind that because they get to do what they want. It's maddening. I get it. It really is. What's the pattern with Elizondo, though? Most of his public statements focus on unknown objects entering military airspace. He also focuses on potential technology gaps, and he also focuses on air safety for our jets and Air Force. So his framing is usually national security, not extraterrestrial aliens. Truly. Why the 2027 rumor keeps on surfacing is interesting because it's the most popular narrative. It is imminent disclosure, and that is what we want. More than anything else, what's the main complaint? Oh, it's a nothing burger when someone gives out new information from a whistleblower or has another congressional hearing. And the other main complaint is we've been waiting for 80 blasted years. When is it going to open up? That is a perfect mixture for just making stupid shit up, imagining we're moving the ball down the field, right? Without question. We want imminent disclosure. And what was the name of Lue's book? Imminent, right? We want dramatic revelations. We want scheduled paradigm shifts. I'm ready, aliens. Come and get me. Man, how many times have you read that in the comments videos? Quite a few, you know. And that's been repeated since the 1950s. So what we can say is Elizondo investigated unidentified aerial objects as a defense issue, and some of those sightings remained unexplained. So we don't have him predicting an actual UFO coming in 2027. I don't know if you're aware of that or not. We don't actually have that statement. The bottom line is we look for connections between rumors and actual intelligence programs, and that's important to do without question. But the specific link of Elizondo to the 2027 UFO mothership is just not there. Prove me wrong. Appears from interpretations of his statements rather than the documented evidence. That's how they're connecting Elizondo with 2027. But that's not evidence. So there's a specific 2017 internal Pentagon memo that really triggered the entire modern UFO disclosure, and that was Lue's resignation from ATIP. And now we've got involved, Chris Mellon and Carl Nell and, Gary Nolan. All of them are all together. But what did they actually state? And what do the interviewers infer when they talk to them? Those two things are usually different. Very interesting. So this is extremely common in the UFO media. We are evolved several steps past the original statement. Why Carl Nell is interesting in this discussion? Because he's not just a random commentator. He's big stuff, right? He's been connected to the U.S. Army Futures Command, aerospace industry leadership roles, the UFO discussions around whistleblower David Grush, and of course, his famous comment at the 2024 conference. Non-human intelligence exists, and they have interacted with humanity. There is zero doubt they are real. That's just as straightforward as it gets, but understand, while that causes huge waves of enthusiasm in the UFO community, and I too was very impressed and enthusiastic and kind of, wow, what more do you want for disclosure? I made videos myself too on it. He did not present evidence publicly, nor has he yet to do so. We have a confident statement, but we have no evidence. That's pretty important. So we have Nell's confidence. We have Elizondo's hints. We have Grush's testimony, a very powerful testimony in the hearing of Congress. There's no question about that. But from here, larger narratives are created that aren't original to the meaning, and that's what the 2027 rumor has ended up being. So the resignation letter by Lue in October 2017, that began disclosure from 2017 on to right now today. He was leaving the ATIP, which is the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. That's very important to understand what the emphasis is. Not on crash retrieval, as the legacy program was said to be involved with. No, that wasn't what he was doing. So it investigated unusual aerial encounters, but that doesn't mean spaceships at all, because there's a lot of unusual stuff up there in the sky, right? So you're talking military sensor data that he could discuss and find advanced aerospace possibilities. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff you have to check for. And it was supported by Senator Harry Reid. So 2 months after Elizondo left the Pentagon, a major story broke out, 2017, New York Times, Politico, The Washington Post. Leslie Kean, Ralph Blumenthal, and Helen Cooper broke the story about the Tic Tacs and the gimbal and the Go Fast UFO videos. And here comes the UFO debate, and it hasn't slowed down at all. So we've got all that. Why this matters for the legacy program debate. And I'm going to take a quick break. I'll be right back. I won't be long, but I will be back. Just hang tight and talk in the chat. I've got an errand to run. Oh, the joys of being human, huh? Wow, 5 people showed up while I was gone. Hot dang, maybe I should disappear more often. All right, so why this memo is important. Lue's resignation. Because he says to Mattis, his boss, the government should take unidentified aerial phenomena more seriously. You can interpret this 2 ways, though. He believed the Pentagon was ignoring a real technological mystery. That's one possibility. Or you could say the Pentagon was not properly investigating potential threats from unknown craft. And that's another very valid interpretation. Either way, notice where his concern is. It's not about extraterrestrial alien spaceships and motherships. It's about defense readiness. And that's what ATIP was for, right? He wasn't talking about extraterrestrial disclosure at all. So that's interesting. The entire modern UAP movement comes from this. So here's the really fascinating piece when we put together Carl Nell and David Grush with Lue Elizondo. All 3 of them seem to be pushing the same strategic message. Now notice that this is the main whistleblower, David Grush. It's one of the very main military people, Carl Nell, and it's one of the main government agents, Lue Elizondo. So they have their bases covered in all 3 major departments. And what is their main emphasis is that the U.S. government has information about UAP that Congress and the public do not fully understand yet. Now, whether that refers to advanced foreign technology or classified human programs or something stranger in our skies. We just don't know. So when they're talking to us, are they sharing actual valid information about alien craft? You know, the kind Jake Barber said he went and picked up in remote places? Or are they talking about human technology? Or are they talking about something genuinely unknown that they need to be concerned about because the unknown is dangerous? You see how this could be made into disinformation because we don't know enough. And they can't tell us what it is because they have security clearances. In other words, what I'm trying to say is there's a lot of room here for potential misinterpretation and misunderstanding between us and what the whistleblowers are meaning. And they can't seem to tell us straight yet. So, when we hear comments that Elizondo makes in videos, in his interviews, and he talks about various UFO research personalities and their speculation about disinformation campaigns, notice almost none of the evidence presented is direct documentation in any of the YouTube videos whatsoever. You have podcast clips, you have hearsay, and you have interpretations of statements that someone has made, and then someone else makes another statement, and we interpret that. But that doesn't automatically make it wrong, but it means we need to treat all of what Lue Elizondo is saying as argumentation, not as proof. And that's the key. Where does the 2027 rumor originate? There's several overlapping sources. John Ramirez has been proposed. Jeremy Corbell, Carl Mell, even Stephen Greer gets in on this list, and now we have Lue Elizondo. Every one of these guys has a different claim about future events. None of them have produced verifiable evidence of a spacecraft approaching our Earth yet either. They talk about it, but there is no evidence. That's the point. It's narrative that we're getting so hung up on and using all of our time with. So right now, 2027 narrative exists mainly as a circulating rumor within the UFO community. The Elizondo quote that fueled this speculation is when he says something like, well, you know, the clock is ticking. He said that in an interview. Yeah, the clock is ticking. Or else he says, well, time, you know, time is not a luxury. That kind of builds the tension, doesn't it? That kind of says, whoa, wait, he's got a good point. Time is not a luxury. And that kind of gives it an urgency that probably isn't really there, even though it really is there. He says, get a hobby for 5 years. You remember that one? Yeah, well, you know, get a hobby for 5 years. And then, ooh, what happens in 5 years? 2027. Ooh, what's going on? But he never does say. We fill in the blank. And what that does is it hides the secret actions of what the government's really producing safely. So he is doing his job at being an information agent and a disinformation agent, allegedly, all at the same time. Isn't that remarkably interesting? That's fascinating. He's very suggestive, yeah, but he never explicitly says aliens are coming in 2027. He does not say that. In fact, neither did Chris Bledsoe say that about 2026. He said something about a new knowledge, but he didn't specifically say Jesus Christ, even though they edited his discussion on the Sean Ryan show And he got very upset with him. And then they went back and put out the original where he had taken it out of context. That's fascinating, isn't it? No one has ever said a mothership is approaching and the government knows an arrival date. Instead, he frames things around the national security concerns, the unknown serial technology, and the future revelations. But the ambiguity is exactly why we interpret his words in so many different ways. And that's deliberate, because nobody knows. You don't know the future. The Space Force timeline. The United States Space Force and the United States Space Command, they have strategic planning milestones around 2027 to 2035, and these relate to, guess what? Missile defense. It pertains to satellite warfare. It pertains to space and our awareness of our United States airspace for safety features, right? So the dates 2027 and 2035 appear frequently in military planning. Is that where this is kind of coming from, you see? It's very interesting. That does not mean that they refer to alien contact when they say this. It's likely what they're doing for their capability. Improving our capability is what they're working on. So Patrick at Vetted, and I'm not trying to pick on him either. I like him. He's a good guy. He does some great investigative work. But that doesn't mean he's always right. And in this case, I don't think he is anymore. At one time, he had me convinced. Then I got reading books like, hold on, Guy P. Harrison. Think. Why you should question everything. And I read that and I thought, I'm going to relook at this because there's some things about this that don't quite make sense to me. And now I understand why. And of course, one of the points of connection is because Richard Doty said he worked with Lue. And that Lue came out of he was involved with Lue in some way. Now, Richard Doty is a self-confessed, legit disinformation agent, man. He was hired and paid to lie about everything with UFOs. Well, that's not exactly the best endorsement to get, right? He's highly unreliable, so citing him as proof is extremely controversial. Well, the Mothership Narrative video that Vetted talks about with Michael Ian Black, he talks about UFO broadcasters and private signal chats, but notice every step of the story from Black is that someone told someone who told someone. He brings no receipts to the table. It's a great discussion. It was very enjoyable to learn, to listen to, and just truly fun. Great guest. But he didn't bring the receipts. That's the problem. It's rumor that we're hearing here. So, and even Black at first didn't believe it. He's like, I don't believe it. If an object that big, planetary size, is on the way to Earth, we'd already be seeing it right now. And that is so true. He makes a great point. Yeah. Right? So, anyway, from everything we can conclude, the confirmed facts about Elizondo is that he did work on UFO issues, of course, and that he did advise the United States Space Force on classified topics. We understand that. There was military planning timelines that often do reference 2027 through 2035. We do understand that. So that's pretty valid historical, solid information. The likely reality is that rumors are spreading around YouTube. because we have nothing new. And so all we have to focus on now is, well, is Stephen Greer gay? And I've seen videos on that are completely irrelevant to the topic. Well, is Lue a disinformation agent? You see how we're all just now going to the rumor mill and speculating. No one has any receipts on this. So it's kind of interesting. The transcript shows how the 2027 alien arrival rumor evolved. It's not demonstrated that Elizondo created it or that spacecraft exist. And I've been 2.5 hours here. I've got a couple of other small items. Oh, thank you. You want me to keep going? You're saying it's a great deep dive. I'll be happy to keep going if you want. If I haven't bored you to tears, 2.5 hours, I could go for 3 hour long. Let me get a swig of water. So what we're getting more involved in speculation, and that's inevitable. I'm not arguing against that, but let's identify the speculation as speculation would be my personal advice. See, Michael Black described being invited into a private signal chat where someone claimed that a planet-sized object was entering our solar system and that it was decelerating and it was going to be here about 2027 and it was intelligently controlled, allegedly, etc. You see how the story fills in and it expands. The astronomical style image of the object, but he did not believe the claim, and the image could have been anything. So see, even the storyteller treats it as an unverified rumor. That's pretty important, I would think. So cool. So now, how did Lue get involved in this? Is when Jeremy Corbell said, well, 2027 is when the big lie is going to happen. There's going to be an object approaching the Earth. And I thought, that video comes from Jeremy Corbell. He's collaborated with Lue Elizondo on media appearances and documentaries. And I'm not throwing accusations. I'm just trying to show how this thing works. So the chain of association, people draw looks like this. You have a signal chat rumor. Corbell is closely associated with Elizondo. Corbell speculates that Elizondo is connected to the narrative. No, not Corbell. I meant Black. Sorry. Black, they speculate that Elizondo is connected to the narrative, but notice something very interesting. No direct statement from Elizondo himself shows up at all. They can't get his exact words, so they go to someone else who said, well, Elizondo said this or whatever. That's 2 steps removed from the original source. I'm just pointing that out to you. A careful critical thinker is going to realize 2 steps away from the original source that has to be taken into account in order to assess the validity of a claim. I'm not saying it's true or false. I'm saying there's factors here that weigh the probabilities. And yet, what did Corbell actually say? This also makes a difference because it wasn't exactly the same as the signal rumor. His statement was a false narrative may be introduced claiming a large object is approaching Earth. He framed it as a possible disinformation event, not as a confirmation of an incoming spacecraft. Now that changes the context again, doesn't it? That's very interesting. So now we got 2 interpretations, a real incoming object and a fake narrative about an incoming object. There's completely different claims, but they get mixed together when we hear about them online. And that's important. Where Elizondo actually enters the broader conversation is with his comments like the clock is ticking or time is not a luxury, go get a hobby for 5 years, stuff like that. They make people think that something significant is coming on the horizon and we got to get ready for it. What could it be? Well, hey, how about a planetary-sized UFO mothership? That'd be pretty damn dramatic, wouldn't it? Whoa, dude, I'd love to see something like that happen. Yeah, let's call it that. And there's no receipts to it at all. When they bring the receipts, I'll be the one saying, whoa, dude. Until then, I'm going to stay skeptical. That's how this works, right? So these are unverified insider stories is what I'm trying to tell you. We're in a hall of mirrors, unfortunately. You got to do like in the Bruce Lee movie, break those mirrors so that you can see clearly instead of just reflections, right? The 2027 narrative may have originated inside small rumor networks. And let me go to this other. No one links Elizondo to the 2027 object. Let me go to this next interview that I think he had on Chris Ramsey, who actually did have Lue on. Let me see if I can find this real quick. Yeah, and I mean with this litany of people, John Ramirez, Jeremy Corbell, Carl Nell, Stephen Greer, they have a different idea, a different claim of the future events. They might have actively fueled the idea. Others interpreted it or associated it with the community, etc. But none of it really brings receipts explicitly. Important detail. He did not say a mothership is arriving. He suggested a timeline for revelation or contact. Maybe it was expanded into something much more dramatic, etc. Carl Nell never said anything about it. He never connected anything to 2027. Steve Greer warned that something slightly different. He said it's going to be a potential false alien invasion narrative used to justify military spending. That seems to be the most credible at this point. He'd been saying that for 30 years, some version or other of 30 years, but he never did specify a specific year or object. He's just talking about a false alien invasion. That doesn't include a great big mothership. He doesn't say the extent, the size, nor when. So, see, it's all kind of, vague. Doggone it. That's too bad. Something big is coming. Well, the timeline is approaching, or there may be deception about an object. None of that is a mothership in 2027. You can combine all of it into that story, but that's not what was originated and said. So that's very interesting how this works. All right, I'm making progress here. 2027 shows up in real world space science. The timeline is misinterpreted or repurposed inside the UFO community. Oh, yeah. The Vera Rubin. If I get my name right, huh? This is an observatory timeline that's getting ready to come online. And what is this? This might be one of the ways that this misinterpretation of 2027 has occurred, and no one has ever brought this up at all. And this is one of the biggest astronomy projects ever built. It's called the Vera C. Rubin Observatory. The mission is to map the entire night sky repeatedly. And what that's going to help it do is to detect moving objects in the solar system. And it will be able to catalog millions of asteroids and interstellar objects. It's the Legacy Survey of Space and Time is what it's going to be called. Now, the interesting thing is it is expected to reach its full operational survey capability in, come on, say it, you know it, 2027, right? Now, when this happens, they're going to be able to inspect or see millions of new asteroids and interstellar objects entering the solar system. They're going to be able to see unknown moving bodies that we have never seen before, etc. I mean, this really is a genuinely exciting astronomical instrument, and timing 2027, etc. Maybe it'll see the great big UFO mothership. Maybe this observatory will be what the government uses to try to convince us that, hey, we see a great big mothership coming. Who knows? But 2027 is important. So that's kind of interesting. Let me look through here. The most likely origin. We do have real aerospace information, but there's a lot of speculation about hidden programs. So when technical milestones leak into conversation, they can morph into dramatic predictions. We know that. Now, the 2027 timeline likely originates from astronomy and space surveillance capability milestones, and especially the Rubin Observatory Sky Survey. So what this means is, inside UFO discourse, that technical milestone appears to have evolved into a rumor that something specific is going to arrive in 2027. Since nobody has been able to bring the receipts that Lue Elizondo is ever said this and that he is a disinformation agent. Yeah, you got some people putting two and two together and tying it to Lue, but that's not good enough. The core claim in the UAP GERB interview with Chris Ramsey at Area 52. Lue Elizondo may have secretly been part of the Legacy Crash Retrieval program, but he doesn't bring the receipts. Maybe Elizondo had deeper access than he admits. Maybe he didn't. You see how this becomes kind of fluff? And I like UAP GERB. He does not do fluff research, but on this one, I don't know. I'm not convinced necessarily. So let's keep going. I'm getting there, I promise. And then there's the argument about, well, was Lue Elizondo really at ATIP? Some people say he wasn't. Some people say he was. So there's a little bit of bureaucratic confusion and all that. And that just adds more to the mystique of, well, then where do we situate Lue Elizondo? Hey, he may have been part of the Legacy program, but there are no receipts with it. So, you know. The interesting thing is they say, you know, the secret's been hidden for 80 years, but as at the same time they say, but thousands of insiders know, crash teams retrieve craft, private contractors study them. So statistically, that means there would be hard evidence that would have leaked by now, and we have nothing. That's starting to take its toll on my belief. I'm not going to hide that from you, right? So secrets of that scale historically never stay hidden. Not with the Manhattan Project, it didn't. Not with the Pentagon Papers leak, it didn't. Not with the PRISM surveillance program disclosure, it didn't. It wouldn't with UAPs. You know, Once thousands of people are involved, leaks happen with actual evidence. So, but the story persists, and there's a reason, because eyewitness testimony does feel powerful. I mean, let's admit it. Classified programs do create mystery, genuinely so. And especially when they have cool names like Legacy, right? And then the government secrecy is very real. We're well aware of that by now. So what we do is we fill the gap in the narrative with something. Actually, the more exciting and interesting, the better, right? This is a myth-building system that we're involved with here, with no receipts that I'm aware of. The U.S. Navy did record unexplained aerial objects. Pilots did encounter objects with unusual flight behavior. There's no question about that. The Pentagon did investigate them. That's it. That's what we know. So everything beyond that, your crash retrievals, eggs, aliens, all of that, those are all unverified claims. Truly, even with Ross Coulthart's egg video, it's an unverified claim. That's where we're at least I think. Now, I'm trying to get to this. Oh, here we go. Lue Elizondo on the Chris Ramsey Show. This was excellent. Great interview. You really need to see it, man. I loved it. So, the most important thing Lue repeatedly does in this discussion with Chris is he literally says, let me see if I can thread the needle on this. What does that mean? And he says it several times throughout the interview. On some items that Chris asked him about, well, let me see if I can thread the needle on this. In intelligence language, what Lue is saying is he won't confirm classified information, but he won't directly deny any speculation either. So it kind of builds a third communication style, You're not confirming it, but you're also not denying it. So what's happening is you're allowing interpretation. That's key to Lue's methodology. Once you understand that, some things start making a lot more sense about Lue. He's hinting at something larger. Is he? Technically, he hasn't actually revealed anything specific, and that's true. And people have noticed that. Yeah. I'll go through this. Okay, the Operation Interloper Trap. This is one of the most interesting real-world claims. He says the Pentagon planned to place a large nuclear footprint at sea in order to attract the UFOs, right? Well, that was going to connect UFOs with nuclear weapons. Again, near nuclear weapons anyway. And they would have explored those connections. Robert Hastings would have been excited. Jacques Vallée, however. Problem is, there's no publicly released documentation confirming Operation Interloper yet, right? So his discussion of classification is actually very credible. One of the most realistic sections of the interview is when he explains why this topic remains a secret anyway. There are valid reasons. He gives 3 that he thinks are good. There's Cold War intelligence competition. If we can stay smarter than our opponents, so much the better for us, right? So the U.S. didn't want the Soviet Union to know what it knew or didn't know. This aligns with real Cold War policy. CIA hid the Lockheed U-2 program, and they allowed UFO rumors to spread far and wide in order to ensure no one would actually say, oh, you mean that thing way up there is ours? And that would have gave the game away to the Russians. He didn't want to do that. There's a fear of radar confusion. He mentions the concern that UFOs could trigger false nuclear alerts. And that actually appears in historic documents like the Robertson panel, as I discussed earlier. So that panel warned that UFO reports could overwhelm air defense systems. That's very interesting. What's the psychology of this interview with Chris that Lue had? He repeatedly shifts the conversation from evidence to philosophy. Lue does. Have you noticed that? Because he's not allowed to. Lue doesn't bring the receipts, in case you didn't know that. Lue never brings the receipts. He can't. So he's going to shift it to philosophy. And he's very good at that. You know, he brings up human evolution and tribalism and religion, and he gets off on a completely different subject, and you're really talking along and really enjoying yourself, and you chew up 3 hours of time together, and then you say, thank you for coming, Mr. Elizondo, see you later, and you didn't get any evidence whatsoever, but you got a whole bunch of cool interview that you can get 345,000 likes on and views, but no evidence. Because he can't give it to you. See, talk about the future of humanity instead, This keeps us engaged. Chase Hughes has a brand new video on this. The idea is not to give you information, is to keep you engaged. You'll want to check out that Chase Hughes video, brand new. I've watched it 3 times already, and it's phenomenal. So it's a classic intelligence briefing communication style. What is not in this video is very precious little 2027 evidence at all in the first half of this interview. So if that's what you're looking for, you need to go to the back half of this. But there are a few hints later that they'll come. The most revealing statement in this entire interview with Chris, which is really important, and I'm going to highlight this, and then I think we can call it a day. This is the line that matters the most without question. Are you ready? Sit up and pay attention. Here we go. My role isn't to provide answers. My role is to provide information. That statement explains Lue Elizondo's entire strategy every time that man talks. He is not lying. He is not giving you disinformation. He is guiding it away from worrying about the evidence to just giving you information of anything he can. Fragments of information, unresolved anomalies, he'll talk about them all day long, no problem. Possibilities, absolutely. You can talk to him for hours on possibilities, and it's perfectly valid. And he leaves the conclusions to the audience. He never comes to conclusions. And that's critical. That's very important. Because he can't. He's under NDAs, for crying out. Do you not understand what an NDA is? Do you not understand? Lue is never going to give you disclosure. Why are you expecting him to? It is a silly stance on our end. If you want to have a great time talking about, beer and pretzels and the health value of them, great. He'll talk your ear off. So, does he ever provide verifiable physical evidence? No, because he has provided us with testimony, with stories, with interpretation of classified reports. In other words, information, but that's all you get. So I really think, here we go. Here's another most important line in this interview when Chris asked him, okay, I can't stop it. 2027. First thing out of Lue's mouth, I never said 2027. You really need to go watch that interview. I never said 2027. That's very clear. Lue Elizondo explicitly says people clipped interviews together. Is that not what I just said has happened? Absolutely so. The internet created a narrative. Let that sink in. Really. He did not say 2027. So this claim then did not originate from Elizondo directly. But he does reveal something very, very interesting. Right after denying the year, he says something subtle. He says, there was an official effort by some people in the government to look at this data. And then he adds, a product was written. Now that's very intelligence community language. In government term, a product usually means an intelligence assessment or maybe a classified report. It could be a technical analysis. So what we have Lue Elizondo confirming here is that some government analysts studied a data set suggesting something unusual, and they therefore produced a report about it. And then he immediately cautions, I wouldn't go to the bank with it. Meaning even inside government is not considered reliable prediction. Do you get that? That's very interesting. So this explains why the rumor likely came from a very common intelligence life cycle. And here's what it looks like. Analysts know this unusual data. They produce an internal assessment. Someone hears about that assessment and the rumor spreads outside the classified system. By the time it reaches podcasts, it becomes the government knows something will happen in 2027. But inside intelligence works, it may have been nothing more than someone analyzed a data set that suggested a possible future event. And that happens constantly. And it means nothing. Well, what kind of data could he be talking about then? Well, he doesn't say, but there's three realistic possibilities. Astronomical observation data, objects entering our solar system. That happens, of course. I mean, come on. We had Oumuamua, we had Borisov, and now we've had 3i Atlas that they still won't quit talking about. And it's going to be to Jupiter in another 9 days. And they're still thinking that's a goddamn mothership. Wow. Talk about tenacity. Wow. So these models trigger a lot of modeling about future interstellar visitors, right? So anyway, the key phrase Lue keeps using, thread the needle. That's important to listen to him, to understand what that means, thread the needle. I'm going to answer without confirming classified information is what that means. I'm not going to give you any classified information. What I will give you is information. But so what? I can get that in the book, right? And make sure to understand that if you're talking something like aliens or crash retrievals or hybrids or aliens hiding among us, I promise you want more information, go to Danny Sheehan, not Lue Elizondo. Because Lue is not a disinformation agent so much as he is just an information agent. Danny Sheehan, man, he will blow your flipping mind. But again, where's the receipts? Yeah. They'll all acknowledge discussion exists. They'll avoid confirming direct evidence, and they'll reframe the question into a philosophical discussion every time. And this keeps them technically inside clearance rules. Lawyer-client privilege, right? That's how it works. So, and even when he does talk about aliens among humans, aliens living among humans, how does Elizondo handle that? Did you notice that? He never confirms it. He really does not. He only says, well, camouflage exists in nature. You notice the shift right now. You're already into philosophy. You're already into evolution and biology. Charles Darwin, here we come. He is so far away from extraterrestrials, it's ridiculous. It's a hypothetical analogy. It's not evidence. Another example of the needle threading technique, man. Notice on the cattle mutilation part, this was interesting. His response here is very grounded when he answers the discussion. He says, well, some cases look unnatural, that's for sure. But humans also mutilate animals routinely. Researchers who study this include Linda Moulton Howe and Christopher O'Brien, but the phenomena remains unexplained. You notice he didn't touch that with a 10-foot pole, right? Interesting. Lue's deeper philosophical point here is really cool to be able to comprehend for any future discussion with anybody or any future viewing of Lue Elizondo. Because he's not lying. He's just giving you information. He emphasizes something pretty important here at the end. Human perception is extremely limited, and he references the famous concept of pale blue dot. And he discussed the scale of the universe, the limits of our human senses, hearing, sight, taste, smell, etc., touch, feel, hunger. My tummy's hungry. By the way, I've lost 2 more pounds. I've slowed down a little bit, but I'm still going down in my diet, so that's woohoo, good news. So notice what he says. He talks about the scale of the universe. Now we're talking about the limitation of human senses, perception, limits of human senses, the electromagnetic spectrum. The argument is basically we shouldn't assume we understand everything about reality. And that's a reasonable scientific position. That's very important. But he didn't bring any alien evidence. You notice it's back to philosophy, and really cool philosophy. Scale of the universe stuff, man. That's cosmological philosophy. I love that shit. That's some of my favorite stuff to talk about all day long. The real takeaway is simply this. When you strip away the speculation, Elizondo actually says only a few firm things. He claims the government studied UAP seriously, and that is rock solid truth. I read to you declassified government documents. I will put them in the link below this video, the link to them. Something else that's rock solid is there are unusual cases with strong sensor data. Absolutely. And that also is proven, in every UFO book ever written by Dolan, among others. Analysts once looked at data suggesting a possible future event. That is true. But he rejects the 2027 rumor, and everything else remains speculative or classified. Now, I've been comparing like Cold War documents and nuclear base sightings and intelligence history and modern UFO discussions among all the different authors and content creators on YouTube and TikTokers and Facebookers and all that, right? I've been trying to get a variety of different views and contexts so that we can understand when we have something that's valid with evidence and when we have something that is produced through fun discussion, philosophizing, even making shit up. And there is a difference. Because this is how you learn how to critically think. And I like doing that. But make no mistake about it, I'm not against the speculation and the philosophizing and all. I'm not against getting information. But you have to go to the right people to get the right information. And the intelligence officers and the government ain't them. Isn't that remarkable? Now they're the absolute loudest mouths out there on the reality of all of this. Where's the receipts? That settles the issue immediately. That cuts off just receiving information, and it certainly cuts off fantastic philosophical discussions that you could have for the next 14 hours with this person if they're your guest. But the moment you ask, where's the receipts? That changes the discussion, doesn't it? Just something to think about. Right? I think I've got through all this. I really do. Yeah, that's the end. So thank you for enjoying this deep dive with me. Periodically I need to do a little bit more of this stuff because when you, the advantage of a deep dive is you really get to bring out and spell out in detail either how an argument works in order to either verify or refute something, or you get to really lay out the magnificence of the evidence or the magnificence of the lack of evidence of claims. And all of that is really fun to do. It's fun to know. It's fun to learn. Fun to study. It's fun to research. It's fun to share. So thanks. It's been a lot of fun, man. So I will do this again periodically. Tomorrow evening, 6:00, if you can stand watching me, come on over and I'm going to do another live on my regular Sunday live. I appreciate all of you. Hit the like and subscribe and, buy me a cup of coffee. That's what the other podcasters say. That's so boring and predictable. Buy me a little red Corvette, and I don't mean a Matchbox. There we go. Yeah. Think out of the box, baby. Screw the hamburger and fries. Give me my Corvette. You got to have a little fun, don't you? All right. Hey, I appreciate all of you. I'm not kidding. Thanks so much for sharing this time with me. I'm going to go. I will catch up to you tomorrow night. Now, that's 6:00 Mountain Time in the United States, if you didn't know it. So, all right. Appreciate it. Hasta la vista, baby. I hope you guys have a very blessed and fantastic weekend for the rest of the weekend, too. So, there, take that. See you soon.